Sup, y'all? I am your host, Taylor Onion, and this is Hang Time. My guest for today is Camber Clemence, who I was connected with thanks to our mutual connection on LinkedIn, Tim Bryson. Tim, the ultimate connector, tagged me in a post that Camber had shared. And the post that got us here, you had shared. I'm going to let you really tell the story, but it was about your role that you played in the Play It Forward, a book from Together, which is super exciting.
Yeah. So I'm Camber. I met Tim actually. I used to run a nonprofit that was dedicated to working with girls in underserved communities, specifically girls that played basketball, just helping them with personal branding. These are kids who wanted to go on and play in college or have big dreams to play professionally. And so Tim and I got introduced through that back when he was at Mogul and was able to do some work with him and his kids there. As you said, he really is the ultimate connector. Tim's one of those guys who, like, if you're not in the room, he's going to make sure your name gets mentioned. So we love him and appreciate him. But as far as the book goes, I am lucky to be friends with some really amazing folks like Lindsay D'Arcangelo and Molly Cahalan. And Lindsay was working with Layla Sales at Together to kind of put the book together. And she reached out to see, if I would be interested or if I knew anyone else that might be interested in participating. And she gave me, a little bit of a synopsis of what they were trying to do. And so I roped in Molly from there. And yeah, Lindsay just connected us with Layla, and they had, a plethora of like topics to choose from. You could also pitch your own, but I was really drawn to the two stories that I wrote about, and one for personal reasons. I am also a queer person, so writing about the tennis story. I don't want to get too deep into it right now. That was really cool. And then there was a topic that wasn't exactly the one about the incarcerated women playing in jail, but it was sort of like that. And so I started doing research into that, like playing sports in jail or playing sports in prison or in those types of situations. And I came across a project from the Twinning Project, which they're based out of the UK, and they do a lot of work in men's prisons over there with the football clubs. And they just happen to have started very recently trying it in the US with women's jails and women's soccer. And I was just very interested in that. And, as you know, and so many people probably listening know, like soccer, not just soccer, but sports in general really has the power to like change your life and help you understand like leadership skills and, going through adversity and pivoting and doing different things. So it was very interesting to me how it was being applied, in that scenario and with grown women versus, children. We talk about it a lot when we talk about girls playing youth sports. So yeah, I just kind of dived right in, and Layla and the team over at Together really liked that angle. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. So I feel very honored to be part of it. But yeah, it was great.
Super cool. I guess I should take a step back too. So for the listeners, if you're not aware of Together, first of all, how are you not
Wow.
aware of Together?
At this point.
Right. I think if you think you're not aware of them, you probably are. Surely you've heard of the Everyone Watches Women's Sports shirt. I'm rocking one right now for the occasion. But these generated what, like I think over $6 million of revenue just in
Yeah.
2024 alone. And so as a media company, and I'm gonna mess up I'm hoping the founders, you can step in. So Sue Bird is a big one, Alex Morgan is a big one. I think those are the two. Sue wrote either the ending of the book or the foreword, and then
He wrote the
Alex.
I think Alex Morgan wrote the foreword, and then Sue wrote the like footnote or whatever you want to call it.
Okay, at the very
Yeah.
end, which is
Yeah,
so cool.
there's like five of them actually, and I'm gonna feel really terrible that I can't name all five. But yeah, it's like Sue Bird, Alex Morgan, Jessica Robertson, and then there's like a gymnast, and her name is escaping me right now, and then there's one other person. So I think it's like five of them.
Yep, I just looked it up. I'm gonna save
Yeah.
us. So it's Alex Morgan,
Perfect.
Sue Bird, Chloe Kim, Simone
Okay.
Manuel, and then Jessica Robertson as the chief content officer. It's just a super cool concept to begin with that I think was introduced at a time when I don't wanna say, like, on the front end of this bubble that we're experiencing now,
Mhm.
but definitely they had seen a gap, as everyone has, in
Yeah.
coverage and just media support for women's sports and for women in sports, and so it's been cool to see how from kind of this concept into the shirt and merch and all the women who have worn that. I loved it took a lot of, willpower for me to not buy the French version during the Olympics last summer. I don't know.
Yes.
In my head, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I have to, I gotta have that," but I just stuck with the English version for now, so but super cool, obviously,
Yeah.
as a company. So the book itself is called Play It Forward, and then it's focused on how women are changing sports
Yeah.
to change the world. So you shared a little bit about how you kinda got connected with that
Mhm.
book in general, but can you talk to me a little bit about how, like, the journalism piece I think you mentioned in the post that you had been a journalist in,
Yeah.
a former life or a former career and a huge
Mhm.
fan of women's sports.
Mhm.
Tell me a little bit about, I guess, those 2 things and how they
Yeah.
connected for this.
Yeah, so, in definitely a former definitely a former life, I was working for a magazine doing a lot of, like, local interest pieces, talking about local government, things like that, and then, it was, like, a really weird time to be a journalist because it was really that time period where we were starting to really move into, like, online news, and that's where you're getting your information versus print. And so we started kind of to be furloughed, and that was tough. And so I had a friend who was an editor at a lifestyle magazine, and they pulled me there. And so there I talked a lot about like health and wellness, fitness. Those are things that are just very important to me in general. And so I spent like another 5 years doing that until they got bought, and then that was the end of that. So now I work in marketing, which is just another way of storytelling. So kind of just, made that jump over there. But as far as like, women's sports, I didn't really have the opportunity to play sports growing up. I had a childhood that just did not really allow for that. And, it's just been really interesting to me. I have 2 daughters, getting them involved and just watching, like, whether it's sports or, groups at school or they all play instruments, how empowering that is for young girls just to have something to be part of and teaches them leadership skills and teaches them to, kind of roll with the punches sometimes and teamwork. And just there's so much that you learn from not just from sports, but being part of any kind of team like that or group like that. And so that's kind of, where I started paying more and more attention to women's sports. And, we started going and supporting the games here from a high school level. My partner is also a high school coach. She coaches girls basketball, girls lacrosse, girls soccer,
Oh
and
my gosh.
occasionally, yeah, and occasionally girls volleyball.
Oh my
So
gosh.
she's year-round coaching. I'm actually leaving to go to a lacrosse game, right after this. So sports is pretty, well woven, into my life, and from there, it just kind of grew into, okay, well, now we're watching college sports and we're watching professional sports, and I was laughing at a TikTok the other day that someone was like, I wish I could be in a lesbian relationship. No, you don't have ESPN all the time. And I was like, I don't know what house you live in. You have ESPN or any sport channel on pretty much all the time. So, we're just really big fans over here and really big fans of Together and all the, women's outlets, but Together especially is so great because it's like the intersection of like journalism and culture for women's sports. So it's just really amazing to watch how that space has grown, and getting to be a little part of it is really awesome.
Yeah, we talked a little bit on the first episode a couple weeks ago, just the differences in ways that folks are writing about women's sports, talking about
Mhm.
women's sports, the stories that you see popping up. Like it's not just, oh, they won a championship and it was
Right.
great for the school, right? Like we're getting into, particularly with, I think, with Caitlin Clark and with Angel Reese and some of those kind of more dramatic personal storylines we
Mhm.
saw within the last year. It's just been so cool to see how some of those unfold.
Yeah.
So you shared a couple of the stories that y'all get into, obviously with a book that's focused on how women are changing sport to change the world. It's going to go beyond just, a college, what's the word I want to look for? Like a college competition, between each other, a little bit of
Right.
trash talk.
Yeah.
And you shared a little bit about, so there was a tennis one, you mentioned the one about incarceration and those pieces.
Yeah.
And I think from your post, I can remember seeing something about Indigenous women forming a softball team, older women
Mhm.
finding friendship. So really, I mean, spanning, you covered the gamut as far as topics from a sports standpoint, right? It's not specific to one age or one sport
Mhm.
or one kind of topic. So tell us about if there was a favorite story you wrote about. How did you come across these stories to begin with? Like, what did that process look like?
Yeah, so the book is a collection, I think, of 25 essays written by various women. And so the two that I wrote, one was about Daria Kasatkina, which she's a tennis player. She's from Russia. And she came out as queer and also simultaneously spoke out against the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which was like, it's obviously, if you have any idea about Russia, you know that that's both things are scary. And then I also got a chance to write about, like I said, the 20 Projects partnership with Angel City Football Club in Los Angeles to work with the Los Angeles County jail system in regards to like a women's specific jail where they kind of went in and they have these cohorts of women that are selected to participate, and they not only teach them the game of soccer, but they also use Abby Wambach's book Wolfpack as like a guideline for like their classroom. And so they talk a lot about like, you know, those leadership qualities and speaking up for the people around you and how you can be, you know, a pillar in your community and working together and all of these things. And that was probably my favorite one to write, but there's some really incredible stories in there. You know, one story is about a woman who wasn't allowed to wear a hijab during her, you know, her sport, and she went out to create one and then, you know, just really changed the world for women who wear those, or Muslim women. There's a story about Maybelle Blair, who we all know is a league of their own, when she came out as queer at 95 years old. So there's just like a really wide variety of stories. And like you said, it's not about like winning the championship or what they did necessarily to change like that sport that they play, but more how they use their sport to change, you know, the outlook of something within the world. Um, yeah, I really enjoyed writing both stories, but the one with the incarcerated women, we were, you know, obviously we could only have so many words, and I was like racking my brain, like, how am I gonna get this under, you know, 2,500 words or whatever it was, because there's so much there. It's not just, you know, the project that they were doing with ACFC. It's also an underlying story of the carceral system and an underlying story of how, you know, growing up in certain socioeconomic situations predisposes you, you know, to being in situations like that, or when you don't have the opportunity to play sports growing up, how that impacts, you know, people as they become adults as well. So there was just like so much that I was like, I don't like know how to distill this down into 2,500 words. I think I did a good job, but I just felt like there's so much more, you know, there to say. So that was definitely my favorite one.
What do you hope that people take away? I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but what is the hope for you and for some of the other folks who penned these essays as a part of it that
Yeah.
you hope people
So
take away as readers?
yeah, so particularly for my two stories, you know, when I was with the ACFC one, I had the opportunity to interview so many people that were directly involved in that, you know, from the community office at ACFC to the two people that ran the program to, you know, the woman that runs the program at the jail. You can't, obviously I wasn't able to talk to any you know, inmates themselves, incarcerated women, but they were able to still share their stories, like in a written format. You know, I think like the thing that I wanted and everyone that I talked to wanted was they wanted people to read the story and come away from it with an understanding of like no matter our situations or circumstances or what we've done or not done to get ourselves into, you know, any circumstance, at the end of the day we're all humans and we all deserve, you know, to feel part of something and feel like we can always turn it around and, you know, become a different person or a different part of society or your community. And you know, some of these women that participate are there for a life, so they're not, you know, they're not leaving, they're not getting out, and using the project or the cohort as a way to like, how can I take this and implement it in the real world with my family, with my friends, with my community? It's more like how can they implement it within their surroundings and teach the other girls that come in some of the things that, because not everyone's going to have the opportunity to participate, right? So, I think that that was really, the thing is that a lot of us are victims of our own circumstances. Sometimes there's not a whole lot that we can do. And the stories that, I heard from everyone, it's just a real reminder that, to give people grace, extend some grace and some understanding, and I think especially with the Daria Katsakina story right now, we're in a really interesting political time that it fits so nicely into the fold. But, I think from that, like, my biggest takeaway is that she was so brave, to speak up and to say something. And she may never be able to go back home because of that. She has family in Russia and some, she'd gone years without seeing them because once you say you're gay and once you say you don't support something that Russia's doing, like, good luck, getting back into the country, or good luck being safe in the country. And so I think that that was just a really good reminder to me, is like, sometimes there are things that are worth sacrificing in order to speak up for, like, a greater cause. And for her to say, like, this is who I am as a person, I want people to know this about me. I want to be, someone that people can turn to or look to, especially people, back in my home country who don't feel safe, coming out as queer, or coming out against the war. At the end of the day, like, if you don't speak up, like, you're kind of part of the problem. So I just thought that was a really great reminder and just really good timing for the book to come out. But, overall, I think that the book's message in general is that women who play sports are so much more than the sport that they play. And, you can have these conversations about Caitlin Clark changed the game, right? Angel Reese changed the game. Paige Beckers changed the game. Cheryl Miller changed the game. Cheryl Swoops changed the game. Like, all these women do absolutely change the game. But at the end of the day, I think what we're seeing more is the storytelling aspect of who women and girls are in their sport outside of just being an athlete. And I think that's coming more and more to light, especially with NIL, and how it impacts college students, and just kind of, sharing those stories and making sure people know, like, there's more to these people than their stats.
Why do you think it has taken this long for people to realize that there is power in the storytelling of women as athletes, as coaches, as just additions to the world of sport? It seems like men obviously have had those stories told for such a long time. What do you think is the reason for that delay?
Misogyny? I
Let's just
mean, if
simplify
I
it.
can put
Yeah.
it in one word, but outside of that, I think that there is some very real trepidation around sharing these stories, because if you look in the comment section of, any news outlets, Instagram, when it's about women's sports, there's so much vitriol there. I do feel like it's slowly getting better. I mean, I used to not be able, I was like, I'm not even gonna click these comments. I know they're gonna be so brutal. And so I think there's definitely, trepidation from journalists, from outlets, media conglomerates to talk about it, because the backlash of it was so intense and it wasn't their market. And I think that's how they got away with it for a long time. It's like, oh, it doesn't speak to our market. They don't want women's sports. They don't want to watch, they don't want to talk about it. But the more that we invest in it, the more that we grow, and we have all these different women's specific outlets now, and there's women's sports bars popping up all over the place, that it really is a matter of, like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Like, did we not talk about it and that's what caused it? Or do people not want it and suddenly they just do? And you have to talk about it in order to people for people to understand it and understand the breadth of it. But you're always gonna have those doofuses who are like, make the short shorter, lower the rim. But yeah, I mean, I just think at the end of the day, for media outlets specifically, it felt like, was there a return on investment in
Yeah.
talking about women's sports? And they didn't feel like there was. And now some of them are a little late to the party, because there obviously is.
How do you feel from a media perspective and from somebody's who has been a journalist? How do you feel the, I guess, increase in media representation, whether it is in an audio form, or I'm thinking of even 3 years ago during the 50th anniversary of Title IX, the 37 Words documentary, or now with Play It Forward. How do you hope that greater representation? Like, I guess, what do you hope it translates to next?
Yeah. So I think that we're starting to see it play out, right? Like we've got all these new leagues that are popping up across different sports. And, for me, I think like that's what I want to see is this continued investment in women's sports, in women's storytelling, in these media outlets. So, we've got Unrivaled League that popped up and they have an incredible amount of, financial backing and investment. And there's another one that's, I can't remember the name of it right now, but there's another one popping up that's like it's almost like a G League for the WNBA, but not related to the WNBA, to kind of get these in between girls maybe a chance to play professionally. And we've got the PWHL and you've got, Athletes Unlimited and they do tons of sports. And we have, it's just more women are getting the chance to play at a level that they never really probably thought was possible. My partner played college hockey and, 20 years ago when she was playing, it was like after college, you were done. You could play in a rec league and that was it. Now you have this opportunity that there could be something beyond college. There is an opportunity to play professionally. There is an opportunity to do these things that, generations before us didn't have. And, I think that you are starting to see it unfold with, major companies, Fortune 500 companies invest deeply in women's sports. Some of them going so far as to divest a little bit in men's sports so they can give more money to women's sports. And I think more parity and equity, especially in college. I think this is the first year that women's teams in the NCAA finals will also receive a payout. It's not comparative to men's yet, but we're moving in the right direction. And so I think that just that continued momentum is what I'm hoping to see, and I think, like, what everyone is really hoping for with women's sports for sure.
I had a reaction, obviously the eye roll to the women just now, women's college teams being paid out the same as the men, some of this stuff. And you think back to, a few years ago, I think it was Sedona Prince on TikTok, exposure of the weight room discrepancies at the men's tournament versus the women's, or not being allowed to use March Madness for the women's tournament and
Yeah,
some of these different things, which is just so, it's like when you hear it for the first time, it's
yeah,
crazy that we're
yeah,
still approaching all of these firsts, like, oh, for the
yeah.
first time ever, we'll hit whatever the next thing is going to be. So
Yeah,
it's
exactly. And that is crazy. Like, and I don't think people realize it until it's pointed out like loudly. I don't think
right.
that a lot of people realize that they couldn't use the March Madness branding, I think, until last year. That this is the first year that teams will, receive money depending on where they land in the finals and the playoffs. And I just think people don't realize how much inequity there is until it just like slaps them in the face and a video goes viral on TikTok.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of who it was. Somebody I talked to, this has been years ago, but they said something to the effect of, like, when it comes to women's sports, so often we're told just be grateful. Like,
Mhm.
you got Title IX, now there's more experience, just be grateful. And whoever it was had said, we can be grateful and want more at the
They
same
want more.
time.
Mhm.
Yeah, like still be
Yeah,
charging toward, equity and all
yeah,
these different things. So
yeah,
that has
absolutely.
always stuck with me. But
Yeah.
all right, I'm gonna move into kind of the last little piece here. So if you could get some hang time with any woman in sports, who would it be and why?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I wish you had told me that I was gonna need to answer this question. Like, had to sit on it, for a really long time. Honestly, I'm probably gonna go Cheryl Swoops. So I grew up in Lubbock, Texas, and she played at Texas Tech, which it's in Lubbock. And so she was really like my first, like, real introduction to sports. Growing up when I was a young kid, she was playing for us and everyone was just like, I mean, we have like streets named after her. And I think that was, just something that was so incredible to me. And she continues to be such a powerful force and a powerful voice for women in sports. And I think that there's a lot of miscommunications sometimes that occur within women's sports when we're talking about the difference between how, Black athletes or brown athletes are treated versus white athletes. And she's always been so vocal about that. And, I think anyone can appreciate that if they really do want to see, equity and equality moving forward within the league. But yeah, I mean, she was just she was like a powerhouse to me when I was a kid. And, she got those cool shoes and we couldn't get them, but, they were just amazing. And so I think having some time with her would be super cool. Just make my inner child just be filled with glee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She is one of a handful of athletes that has a name, like, as cool as her athletic
Yeah.
abilities, right? Like, Cheryl Swoops, of course, someone with the last name Swoops plays
Yeah,
basketball. That
of
makes perfect
course.
sense.
I know, I love it. It always makes me laugh. I mean, this is a man, but Tiger Woods' name always makes me laugh because wood is a type of club, and I'm just like, "How interesting is that?" That,
Right.
like, you have names that are associated with the sport that you play, but yeah, I think her name is super cool, and I just really appreciate that she continues to be invested in women's sports at a really high level.
Yeah. Well, Camber, thank you so much for taking the time today. I appreciate it. It was great to hear more about you and your background and how you got involved with Play It Forward and Together and all the things.
Yeah, absolutely. If you haven't bought Play It Forward yet, you can get it at any bookstore. That's my little plug.
Yeah, that's a plug at me directly too, because I need to go out and get it. I'm excited. Well, thanks again.
Yeah, of course.
And for the listener, you can follow us on social media. It's at HangTimePod, P0D. Comment on the episode. Let us know who else we should be getting on as we move forward into this new venture. Amber, thanks again. Appreciate
Of
it.
course. Thanks, Taylor, for having me on.